What's up, PMC scumbags? It's Shuffle, and this video is going to be breaking down the accuracy mechanics in Quasimorph. Accuracy as a mechanic is involved in many turn-based games. Quasimorph is no different. You have accuracy not only for shooting your weapons, but also swinging them if you decide to melee things. If you've ever played the game and moused over an enemy, you see a percentage, and you may be going, well, Shuffle, it's right there. Why do I need to know this? And I'll tell you, humble viewer, there's actually a lot of things going on under the hood for calculating accuracy. Many of it is things that you would expect, and others are things you would not expect, and some of the calculations get a bit weird. Even though our goal is to define accuracy, we have 3 different sections for calculations that all add up to the hits and mischance of your weapon against an enemy or the enemy against you. There is a secondary type of accuracy as well, and that's called scatter. You may have seen it on all of the weapons and different perks that give you plus or minus scatter chance, and you'll see some weird cringe-ass triangle that says 2.1 degrees, but the scatter matters quite a bit, and so we'll talk about that as well. And in many cases, scatter is more important than accuracy. The first part of the accuracy calculations are on your side, your chance to hit something. So it's going to calculate 5 different numbers with different criteria, crunch them together, and then add it against the opponent's dodge before we get to the net hit, which is the third part. So that means dodge is second. But let's start with the first, and that's accuracy calculations with its 5 numbers.
Ani oczko nie nasadzisz, protože to je univerzální.
Thanks to Ranger for digging out all of the coding under the hood for Quasimorph to make this video a bit more digestible. If you have an adverse reaction to seeing random bits of code, then I apologize, but that's what we have to do. The first number in the 5-number equation is base range accuracy. This is number 1, or just number without any actual number with it, so it's the default value. The modifiers for your first accuracy number are the weapon's current fire mode, accuracy bonus, or penalty. So if you're in full auto, single shot, burst, or what have you, many weapons have multiple firing modes, and these will often impact accuracy negatively or positively. The second value in the first number is the weapon's bonus accuracy, so all weapons have a extra helping of accuracy baseline. So snipers and stuff have more, something like a minigun's gonna have less, and some weapons have very low values. The third part of this number is the perk and talent bonus. This includes the stats of your mercs, classes, and such, if they have any bonus accuracy features like CQC specialist or anything that just gives you plus accuracy, conditional or non-conditional. So if your merc has something like Nico's bonus pistol accuracy at 40%, that's where it gets calculated into this. There's a final factor in this first number called conditional ammo accuracy multiplier, which is a complete headache and will be discussed / displayed later. From here, the arithmetic is pretty simple. You just take giant flat numbers and add them together, and you may have an accuracy value upwards of like 200. The next number to crunch is num2. This one includes many other debuffs and buffs. The list includes wound effects on accuracy, and or implants and augments, because these also affect accuracy at times. These are all calculated as wounds even though they're implants and augments, suggesting that any physical alteration of your actual character's body is considered a wound, even though some of these can be positive. The second number in number 2 is the drunk debuff, meaning that if you are drinking to forget about quasimorphosis, you usually have a penalty, usually a substantial one as well. The third value is the Gavok Vesicle buff. The fourth is Cernuno's Fury buff, which is a pact. The fifth value is the Bipod trait. This is the only place I assume the coding could put it, because it's not technically a perk or talent, it's not the weapon's bonus accuracy by itself. This is some third independent number that is conditional, and it makes the most sense to put it in num2. Number 3 is a calculation called Override Ammo Accuracy Multiplier, not to be confused with the Conditional Ammo Accuracy Multiplier, but they do interact, and here is how. For any physical style ammo like a 797, a 42, or anything of the like, every time you get to number 3, the conditional ammo accuracy thing doesn't matter because the easiest way to say it is the ammo you load into the gun is what the gun fires. And you may be thinking, okay, that makes total sense. Why wouldn't it do that? That's why batteries are a special case. Batteries currently in the near end of early access find themselves going into tons of weapons. Not all these shoot beams, not all these shoot shock or anything like that. Batteries can be used to produce all kinds of different elements. So they can make beam, they can do shock, they can make poison, they can make cold, and probably fire too. If you want to count plasma as a type of fire. This is when the conditional ammo accuracy thing and number 3 really need to sort themselves out, because when you are shooting your ammo, the battery's going to have its own stats, but the gun will have its different stats, and if it's converting it to a new damage type, such as batteries going into poison, then it's going to change the accuracy math. You can check how the ammo is being used in the gun by looking up at the top left of the screen and mousing over the ammunition in your battery weapons. Number 3 is important because since it is the override accuracy multiplier, it is the one that gets used over whatever the battery is giving you for statistics. However, to make sure that batteries don't feel terrible to use, and if you try and stockpile all your Dilthy batteries with all their bonus stats, then they still get used, but just in a different way. This is when it goes back to number 1 and checks the conditional ammo accuracy multiplier, and it looks at the ammunition in the gun, independent of the different firing type that's happening right now. With number 3 set in stone, we head back to number 1 and go down to the conditional ammo accuracy multiplier, and this number takes the stats of the battery itself. In this case, we can use Dilthy because it's the easiest example, and it multiplies it against the rest of the accuracy. A normal battery has no accuracy modifier, positive or negative, so it's just considered 1. The Dilthy battery has a 10% accuracy modifier, so it's multiplied as 1.1. Num4 is a surprisingly short one. It is just the unwieldy debuff or the suppressed debuff. Unwieldy is a debuff you get from swinging certain heavy weapons, and suppressed is something as a debuff that's inflicted on you by other weapons if they can cause suppress. For instance, such as the Legacy. Num4 is the most important and impactful calculation out of the 5 numbers we're talking about, because Num4 is the only one that, if you remember your PEMDAS, your order of operations, this number is outside of all of the parentheses of every other number we're going to talk about for calculation. It's just waiting at the door like a very annoying salesperson, and then the moment you sit down for dinner, you get all of your little numbers into place, you set the table, this little asshole just knocks on the door and says, "Excuse me, I need to do some multiplication," and then it affects the rest of the numbers. We have our first 4 numbers, and now we need to calculate the 5th one, which is a combination of 1, 2, and 3, but not 4. Num5 is equal to Num1 times Num3 times Num2, in that order in the coding, which ultimately doesn't matter because PEMDAS doesn't give a crap about how you multiply things as long as they're all multiplied together. But just so no one pops up in the comments like, actually, Num3 comes between 1 and 2, we know. It just looks weird. There is a second rule that gets applied to Num5, independent of these other number crunches, and the final thing that happens is the Num5 that you just calculated is multiplied by 1 minus 0.25 times your sprint accuracy debuff. The sprint accuracy debuff is 1 by default, so it's always 1 minus 0.25, but this number changes if the Merc has athletics, or implants and other such that affect accuracy while sprinting specifically. If you survive that brain blast of information, I commend you, because now we can say that base accuracy for firing a weapon is equal to Num5 times Num4. Actually, there's one more thing. It says return base accuracy, and that's like the final rule after all this is done, and it says if the weapon has laser sight as a trait, accuracy is forced to the cap, which is 0.95%, aka 95%, meaning all the calculations you just did got thrown out the freaking window, but hey, you have laser sight. Without having to go through all of that again, for melee, it's the same structure, except instead of base range accuracy, it uses base melee accuracy, and the perk lookups use the coding F melee accuracy instead of the ranged ones, which are F range accuracy. Essentially, it's the same thing. The giant fun killer number comes next, and that is enemy dodge, the number that stops you from always hitting and going, man, this game is easy. Why enemy dodge? It make game hard. I hate accuracy. Dodge is not nearly as long of a calculation, but it does have one sticky number in the second part that I'm not going to explain that much, but we will have a visual aid. Num1 out of 3 is equal to cyber compatibility level times total implant count. Cyber compatibility is a perk that scales your dodge per implant on your operator. If you do not have the perk, or you don't have any implants in with the perk, which is a weird choice, this number is 0, meaning that it's just a quick one to check, and it's there because it has to be. Number 2 in the dodge calculation is really dependent on the weight of the gear and items that the character is carrying. The first step in the number crunch is your base dodge plus number 1, so our just regular dodge as a stat, and then adding number 1, which is all of our cyber compatibility and implants. If this is 0, then it doesn't matter, and then this is multiplied by 1. This is then subtracted by 2 different numbers that are multiplied within themselves, so PEMDAS matters. The first number is your total item weight, which is a gargantuan calculation that I don't feel like reading the entire thing of, divided by 100. This is then multiplied by weight affecting dodge multiplier. For any class, this is going to be 2, meaning that 1 kilogram of weight will decrease your dodge by 2%, but if you have the Evasion Master talent, aka if you are Kenzie Yukio, then instead of decreasing by 2%, it decreases by 1.2%, which is a much better clip. The next value we have to consider is the perk parameter sum float. This is equal to the sum of your dodge perks, including both passive and trigger perks. So if you have trigger perks that give you bonus dodge, and they are not active, then it's not counted until they activate. Meanwhile, your passive perks are always calculated. Then if you have the Agile talent, which gives you bonus dodge per AP used, then this is added to this number as well. For number 3, it is equal to the sum of wound effects, and as we talked about with accuracy, these aren't just physical wounds that the character receives, it is also having to do with implants and augments, anything that physically alters the character. Even though we're talking about implants, it's not to be confused with number 1, which is using cyber compatibility, counting the total number of implants. Meaning that cyber compatibility, if you have the little module in the thigh where you get bonus 6% chance to dodge, it'll count it with the cyber compatibility bonus, which is, +2, for example, and it doesn't care about the 6%. But then when you get to number 3, since it's an implant that's installed, that's where the 6% will matter. Then for augments, there are quite a few that alter your dodge, either in positive or negative ways. For example, stuff like the rubber knee. Usually the rubber joints have lighter weights, or they give you bonus dodge. And then you look at some of the heavier augments, like the metal ones, the military and stuff, it'll say it increases your load weight capacity. So even though it doesn't specifically say that it alters dodge, it does because it goes back to number 2 with your item weight. The last 2 specific things that are added is the first one is a pack buff called Sinews of Zarm. And finally, the other one that is added, despite being an implant, it is calculated separately because it can change as a modifier. It is the Bioaccumulator dodge because it gives you bonus dodge per level of fullness. This brings us to our final dodge value, where in the coding, base dodge is equal to num2 plus perk parameter sum float plus num3 times overall multi. Overall mult is 1 by default with the exception of custom difficulty options, because in that you can give the enemies a higher dodge multiplier, or if this is one of the first missions, the player actually gets a dodge buff themselves. You may have been thinking when playing Quasimorph, wow, these first few missions were a lot easier than all the other stuff that came after. And there's a reason. There are little hidden things that they give you to bump you up, specifically this dodge number. For your first mission, so 0 to 1 missions complete, you have a plus 20% dodge. Again, this is the overall mult number here in the final base dodge calculation. If you have 2 missions done, it's 15%. If you have 3 missions done, it shrinks down to 10. And then at 4 missions done, it's 5% bonus dodge. And then after that, you're playing by the actual math, so good luck. And finally, now we can start talking about the actual net hit chance. But before that, it's worth noting that unlike accuracy, dodge has no clamped minimum value in either the get dodge formula nor during the calculate hit info. If you're unaware of what a clamp value is, consider it a minimum possibility. So it's the floor of whatever calculation you're about to do, meaning that accuracy always has a floor of 5%, whereas dodge does not, meaning that having negative dodge is very possible and does a different calculation as a penalty. This goes for both you and the enemy. And having negative dodge isn't necessarily the end of the world. You may be thinking, I have a ton of resist, this is totally fine, right? And to an extent you are correct. However, what's important to note is that negative dodge not only increases the enemy's chance to hit you, or in the enemy's case, if they have negative dodge, this increases your chance to hit them. Once you hit the 95 cap, so either the floor of 5% minimum accuracy or 95% chance to hit, either way you go from that value, there is a crit bonus applied, and we'll talk about that very soon.
Posso davvero stare no timino in cliché, curva. Siamo servizi per pure rapido.
Next, we'll talk about net hit chance, and the first number is very simple. It's your base accuracy minus the target's base dodge. Or if you're getting shot at, it's vice versa. If it were only that simple, I doubt we'd include it in the video, but there is actually quite a bit that goes into net hit chance that later we also have to consider for overcapping accuracy. There's a value called clamped accuracy, and what this does is it sets your accuracy floor and ceiling. The floor being 5% and the ceiling being 95%. Meaning that you always have a 5% chance to hit something, even if you have minus 2000 accuracy, and then you always have a 5% chance to miss something, so a nat 20 and a nat 1 can exist. Your net accuracy is always going to fall somewhere in the middle of these two values. If you exceed one, it's still going to go to the floor or the ceiling respectively, but those extra numbers get calculated differently, and we'll talk about that after. With this in mind, a random float number between 0 and 1, which doesn't sound like a lot, but you have to remember all the decimals in between, is rolled, and if that exceeds the clamped accuracy, it's a miss. If it makes it easier for you to math out and understand, we're dealing with percentages, but if you just multiplied each number by 100, it'll be a bit easier and not have the decimals. In the coding is an auto hit mechanic, and if it equals true, it will override any of these accuracy calculations. This is only seen in certain projectiles and packed effects. There's also a trait called precise throws that you can find on a couple of the weapons that you're allowed to throw at enemies. If you have the precise throws trait, then that means that the weapon when thrown automatically hits because it sets the boolean to true when you throw it. So if you need to make sure you hit something and kill it, consider throwing a knife with precise throws.
Když uvidíš někdy, zkus se podívat kama do trubky sykovací. Zbytku strojů na...
In the net hit chance calculation we just did, we talked about the floor being 5% and the ceiling being 95%. So what happens if you exceed either of those values? Because you're going to be clamped back down to 5 or 95 on your hit chance. The float overcap is equal to max within the range of 0, with net accuracy minus 95 being the other value, which is then followed up with another float number equal to crit chance. And this crit chance has a few numbers that go into it. Things that we've talked about already: weapon crit chance bonus, and your overcap value times 0.5, aka divided by 2. Once those are put together, it is multiplied by the target's incoming crit chance multiplier. For pretty much anyone, this is 1 by default, but for mercenaries, if you're maxed with feel no pain, then it's cut in half again. For overcapping accuracy converting to crit, the multiplier is 0.5, so any 1% of accuracy over the 95 cap gives you a 0.5% crit chance, or consider it a ratio of 2 to 1, so 2 accuracy over the cap equals 1% crit. It won't be often that you find yourself in a situation where you're way under the 5% crit floor, but if you do, that means that wound chance gets penalized. However, some mercs can get very high dodge chance, so this can be in your favor if it's going the other way. Another float number is used, and this time it's the max of the number 0, the second number being 0.05, and your net accuracy is subtracted from the 0.05. The calculation for lowering your wound multi-chance if you're under the cap is effective wound chance multiplier equal to wound chance multiplier minus 2. So most of the time this is just going to be a 1 unless you have something that gives you a bonus or a penalty, and this will be subtracted by 2. However, the 2 is multiplied by how far under the cap you are, meaning you don't want to be under the accuracy floor, because not only do you miss way more often if you have low accuracy, but you also reduce and suppress your chance of applying a wound itself if you do hit something because of the nat 20 ability on that 5% floor. The important thing to remember here is the 2-to-1 ratio, 2 accuracy, 1 crit. Just remember that as best you can, because if you're over and you're shooting something, it's great. It's a benefit, it's more crit, it's fantastic. If you are tanking your dodge because you have heavy ass armor and you overcap the enemy's accuracy as a result, the calculation goes the other way, and then it turns into a bonus crit chance for the enemy against you. So even though you're looting a bunch of stuff and you have just a whole buffalo bag full of machines and the heaviest stuff that you could ever find, and then you have the heaviest armor possible, you're probably going to have a ton of defense, which is great, but you're going to be giving the enemy a lot of crit in return. So be careful. Either find a way to get extra dodge bonuses, or just don't put yourself in the situation where you're going to get directly shot at that often. The section for scatter is thankfully not as long, but scatter is arguably as important as accuracy, and at times more important, because accuracy is something that's pretty easy to get your head around, even if the numbers are a little weird and nebulous in terms of how they're calculated. Scatter is independent of your accuracy, meaning you could have 200% chance to hit something, so you have a ton of accuracy and a ton of bonus crit because you're overcapped, but your scatter dispersion can make you miss entirely, independent of that accuracy. So it's important to know it. The simplest way to explain scatter is that accuracy and crit and all that, you can use algebra to solve that if you paid attention in math in high school. And for scatter, it's trigonometry. It's only 3 different numbers for scatter and then 1 extra rule. So the logic in calculating it is not that hard, but after we do those calculations, I'll break it down with the actual analysis to show how it works in practice. The first number is very simple. Do you have the bipod trait or not? If you do, reduce scatter. If you don't, it's 0. Number 2 is called your base weapon scatter, and this comprises of the fire mode that you're using, what that scatter value is, because some have more scatter or less depending on how you're shooting the gun, plus the weapon's bonus scatter chance. This is then multiplied by the override ammo scatter multiplier if it exists. For example, how we talked about batteries being converted into different types of attacks, such as plasma or poison. If the ammo has any conditional scatter multiplier, so positive, negative, what have you, this is multiplied again at the end of number 2. It's a bit wordy as an explanation, but essentially it's the same thing as the override accuracy and the conditional accuracy multiplier, but this time it's just scatter. There's another float check that is made, and that is called scatter angle mult, and it's equal to 1. This number can change based on your perk scatter reduction, and then there is another specific perk that's exclusively for Sandman. So there are a lot of other perks like CQC Specialist and Heavy Fire, whatever they're called, but there's a few different things that reduce scatter. Sandman is a conditional scatter modifier, so that's why it gets its own separate number for the equation. Meaning that if you have the Sandman perk on, and you're firing a silenced weapon, which means the perk is active, then there is a float number included about scatter reduction, so that gets coupled with any other perk scatter that you have. The final number is num3. This is a sum of wound effects, and as you've heard with the other sections, it's augments, implants, yada yada blah blah. Stuff that you are used to at this point if you've been listening to the video. With that, there is a final check for a return number, and it is the max of num2 times everything we just talked about, so that num2 times scatter angle mult plus num3 plus num1. The thing is, you can never truly reach 0 for scatter. The closest you can get is 0.001, and instead of being algebra or trigonometry, this is actually a calculus limit. We made it through all of the under-the-hood coding number crunches, but the way scatter's actually calculated is pretty cool. So we have all these rules in place for scatter about being this and that, this plus this times that, and then we come to scatter itself being mapped in the game. The first thing to know is that scatter is calculated on a circle of a 20-tile radius. So this is where it becomes trigonometry. So you have a giant circle, and that is around you at all times, technically, that the game's checking every time you fire a shot. I don't know if there's a reason stated for it being 20, but I'm just assuming that 20 is a very plausible long-distance shot that you don't have eyes on. You know, if you shoot a sniper down a hallway, and it's far enough on the circle that if you have these degrees of scatter measuring out, then it's pretty accurate for almost any foreseeable scenario in the game. So that's why it's not like 5, that's not why it's 10, you know, it goes all the way out to 20 before it picks a spot. Each bullet that you fire that has a scatter value is going to be mapped in your straight line that you shoot from, but then it alternates to the left or right of that line that you can see when you're aiming, and those are where your scatter degrees come into place. This is similar to an arc length calculation. If you didn't want to use trig to figure this out instead of arc length, you could just map 2 lines on a circle. With these combined, every bullet you fire, depending on what tile you're aiming at, is where it draws these plus or minus scatter degrees. So for example, if you're shooting at a 90-degree angle, something straight above you on the map, and you have 5 degrees of scatter, your range of that bullet on your circle is either 85 degrees up to 90, which is where you're shooting at, so that's the middle, and then it goes all the way over to 95 degrees. So any bullet you fire is going to be within that cone of a 10-degree spread left or right from the line you're shooting from. This is why scatter's so interesting, because you have your regular accuracy, and accuracy is the king. Accuracy is the thing that matters the absolute most to a point. Enemies that are 1 to 3 tiles away, scatter doesn't mean too much, unless you have like 200 degrees of scatter, which you're not going to have. When you get up to 5 or 6 tiles, you'll notice your bullets scattering, but it's not like they'll scatter so much that often, unless you have, again, a giant cone of scatter, that you'll still be hitting your target if your accuracy is good enough. Once you go past 6, though, and you start taking those long 8-tile, 10-tile, 12-tile shots, like you're shooting down a hallway at something, because you just see damage numbers keep floating up, that's when scatter matters a lot. So if you are trying to shoot something that's over 6 tiles away, and you're hit capped on accuracy, that can sometimes not matter at all, because if your scatter's way too much and you're shooting 10 bullets at a time, you're only going to hit with a fraction of them. Close range weapons are able to get around this, because stuff like the shotgun will fire, you know, a giant spread of pellets unless it's a slug, and those will cover your scatter angle. If you have a sniper rifle that has plenty of accuracy, you're always hit cap, but for some unholy reason you have like 10-degree scatter, anytime you pass about tile 5 and 6, your bullet's going to start curving off into a direction that's nowhere near the target. The easiest way to keep this in your head is that, as I said before, accuracy matters for about tiles 1 to 6. Scatter matters the most on tiles past that. It doesn't matter if you fire 1 or 1,000 bullets at one time in a turn, it's all going to fall within your scatter degrees. So if you're modding some weapons and you want them to be super accurate at longer ranges, don't forget about tightening your scatter, because that also matters quite a lot. Alright y'all, that's it for the video. Thanks for watching. Let us know what you're thinking down below in the comments. Shout outs to all of our supporters who keep the show running strong, and our fantabulous editor Ranger, who makes all of this possible as well, and to you for watching the video. If there are other topics or improvements that you want to talk about for the content, let us know, and we'll see you next time.
Sotto! Tossi mettere progettare... No, no, è alto detto che io. Ah, Taris è... Nedostaneš, tady musíš golu a tady máš toto všetko a nedostaneš se na tento, takže musíš toto chladič ven, aby ses dostal na ty šrouby, abys mohl toto, pak kurva toho, do piče!